Hi everyone, here we are again with the Roland MC303, the original groove box made in 1996, and I gave you a bit of an overview in the last video I made. This time I want to talk a little bit about sound design. And as I already said, the MC303 is more of a Rompler device than a real synthesizer. And what that means is that you cannot really change the waveforms and in the middle of sound design at least. When you change the tone selection here, which in other machines would be swapping out waveforms. In other machines, you can at the same time keep all the settings for all kinds of other parameters. In the MC303, first of all, there are not too many other parameters to mess with anyway, and these will also, the settings for these parameters will be gone when you make a different selection for the tones that you're choosing. So this is very important to know. To get to the best result in sound design, you have to make a good choice of your tone right away, to find a tone that really fits your idea of the sound that you want to create. And I must admit, I have not really, I'm not on a level where I can find me the perfect type of tone right away, because I still have to learn a lot with this machine also. And I think it's a good idea to make a copy with the list of all the tones that are available in the MC303. You can see that these tones or patches consist of either one voice settings or two voice settings. So I think that means that when you select a tone that take up two voices, then you're dealing with a combination of waveforms, of two waveforms. And there's something else that goes along with that, which I'm going to get to later. Just talking about the weird aspects of the MC303 a bit. When we switch the machine on, you have this scrolling, this acceleration function when you're scrolling through things. When you hold down Shift and then you turn the value dial to the right, you can see that this increases the value by an amount of 10. So you can get to higher values quicker using the Shift button here. But when you're on when you've just switched the machine on, pattern A1 is always the first pattern to come up. You cannot use this acceleration method right away to get to the user section, because when you're turning to the right, you go through all of these preset patterns. The user patterns are in the other direction. So you first have to give it just a small little push to the left. Now you can use the Shift button and accelerate the scrolling this way. It doesn't work right away. Coming from A1. Okay, that's just one more example of the weirdness in the MC303. Now let's talk about sound design. As I said, I suggest making a list of these preset tones, and it's not always, but then again, you also need to explore the sounds a little bit. For me, for example, I find my favorite bass tone not in the bass sections, but actually in the drum section, where there are individual drum tones that can also be played over the keyboard here. And there is a waveform taken from the TR-808 in bank number 28. And I think this works great for bass tones. So I have to be in the tone section here. Now I can hold down Shift, get to bank 28, and the sound I'm looking for is number 4. So bank 28, tone number 4. And this doesn't sound like a good bass at all when you first play it. That's how it sounds. I think there's some kind of effect on there already. Dialing that back. Okay, no effect there. Okay, so now that's how it sounds dry. And it's very short. But now we come to the first aspect of sound design. There is an envelope in the MC303. It's not your classic ADSR because there is no sustain phase. Unfortunately, you cannot change a tone like this to something where the sound is constantly held while pressing down a note, but changing the decay parameter here extends the length of the note to a good amount. So you can make this playable. And now this, just by setting it like this, you really can make this a nice sounding bass tone. Okay. Now the other effect, again, this sound will fade out though, even if I keep my finger on the key. There's also, you can also change the attack of the sound. Let's say I don't want it to sound so punchy, but want the sound to fade in over time a little bit. This is only affected in the positive spectrum of this parameter. So anything that's right of the 0. On the left side, in the negative spectrum, the sound doesn't really change at all. Same with release, by the way. I have to turn it to the positive side, and then I can hear that now the sound slowly fades in. And by the way, if you want to have visual control over the exact value that you're dialing in, let's say I want the attack to be +7. You can hold down the function and the shift button simultaneously, same as if you were to select one of these menu pages in the edit menu when you're on patterns in pattern song mode. This first row of commands in these white empty boxes here, when you hold these down and then turn a knob, then now the display changes, and you can see that the parameter, in this case attack, is shown in the display along with the value that I'm dialing in. And I said I wanted this to be 7. Okay, so now that works. When the sequencer is running, by the way, this the display sometimes drops out. It changes very quickly, at least with this machine here. So sometimes it makes sense to stop the sequencer, then dial in the right amount, and then press play again. Okay, so this is really low. I hope you can hear this okay. Let's say I now also want a release. I want the tone to slowly fade out even after I let go of the key. So now I have to press the function button so that it's blinking. And now turning the knob for the envelope will not give me attack or decay, but the release tone. So the amount of time it takes for the note to fade out even after I let go of the key. Okay, and I can see here it's working. Now this now let's talk about one of these other quirks in the machine, because with the waveform that I had selected, this TR-808 bass, this works nicely, but there are some tones in the machine where when I simply want this fade out, I only want the volume of the tone to be affected, but this leads to something else, like here. What was it? Maybe that was the wrong one. Okay, I think it was number 12 then. This is what I noticed. Now when I raise the level up for release here, I don't only get this fade out after I let go of the key, but also a pitch change. And this cannot be changed later on. This is really, it's a shame, because the way this parameter is meant to be used, it only affects the level. But with one of these, in this voice, this particular voice, bank 1, tone 12, this is a combination apparently of sorry for shaking the camera, a combination of 2 waveforms, and one of these waveforms has this pitch envelope assigned to it. But I don't have the possibility to change pitch envelope settings in the MC303. The envelope only affects, it should only affect the level, the volume, the amp, so to say. But in this case, this goes along with a pitch change that cannot be changed later. So if I want a release phase for this tone, the only possibility I have is to choose, to find me another tone somewhere in the machine that sounds similar, and hope that it doesn't give me the same change in the fade for the release parameter. Yeah, so that's a bit of more weirdness, like we already know can happen in the MC303. So okay, I'm going to dial the release back. Oh, I'm sorry again. Sorry. Okay, so let's talk about the filter real quick. Nothing very complicated to find here. This is a bandpass filter that only affects the mid-range frequencies, and these rotary knobs have a double function. When the function button is blinking, then the rotary knob for cutoff doesn't no longer control the cutoff, but instead the level, and not the resonance, but the panning of the sound left or right. Okay, and that's pretty much all there is to say about this. Okay, now let's talk about the LFO, which gets a little more complicated because we are dealing with a number of parameters here that make the modulation effect in the end. So yeah. First of all, the parameters that I can affect right on the panel are modulation intensity. So this needs to be turned up for quite a bit in order for me to hear the effect. There are also incoming intensity levels, which I need to dial in the menu here when holding down Shift. This is the LFO part of the machine, pad keys 9 to 12. Holding down Shift and then pad key number 9 takes me to the page where I can select a waveform for the LFO. I have sine wave, 2 random waves, square wave, saw wave, and triangle wave. And by default, the parameter pitch is pre-selected and set to 64, which I found very irritating when I first had this machine. I never really used the LFO because I wasn't aware that I could dial this back and change it. And I didn't know that I needed to apply, or that I needed to set a value to the LFO in the menu. So let's say I want to affect only the filter. Then I have to hold down Shift, press pad key number 11, have the modulation intensity turned all the way up, or at least I'm going to turn it all the way up so that's so that we can hear it nice and clearly. When this is unlit, this controls the rate of the modulation, so we don't hear the effect from the filter because the filter is set too high. We need to set this lower and then maybe raise up the resonance, and now we can hear it. We can hear it much better now. And the rate, that's the speed of this modulation, now can be controlled using this knob when this is unlit. So from very slow to high, but still not reaching the audio rate. So quite a slow LFO in the MC303 here. Same as, let's listen to how these other waveforms sound. That's a triangle wave, meaning it's going up and down, and kind of like the sine wave, where it's just a little more rounded. The most sudden change to the most drastic modulation is the square wave. You can really hear the sound changing very abruptly from, yeah, so that's how that sounds. Okay, so you need to dial in these intensity levels going into the LFO, and then also raise up the intensity for the modulation using this setting right here. There's a second parameter in this section here with actually there's two other settings in this section, which is the random pan section. When you simply press this button once, now you can hear that each time I press a key, play a note, the sound is coming from a different position in the stereo field. So that's what random pan means. It's kind of, well, the name says it all. It's kind of self-explanatory here. Portamento is a function where one note is transitioned, or where a note transitions to the next note that is played. And so maybe I switch the LFO modulation off for this, so that we can hear it a little better. When portamento is activated, also the function button needs to be activated in order to... Okay, this was the random pan setting. I take this back, and now I switch on portamento by switching on the function button, and then press this key. And now when I use the rotary knob, I can now decide how long it takes the sound to transition from one note to the next. So when this is set up very high, the pitch takes very long to get to the next note. Okay, as you can now hear. So this is slowly transitioning to C here. If I set this faster, so with a lower value here, now this is very fast. Maybe somewhere in the middle. Again, slower. Okay, I think you get the idea. The way this is printed on the panel with this black box, this tells you that the function button always corresponds with these other parameters that are printed in the same way. Like I said in my previous video, all these functions that also are labeled with this black box in the same design. That's how you reach these other parameters. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now the effects section. There are some effects that really sound quite nicely in, they do sound nice, but unfortunately, and this is one of the biggest disappointments in the MC303, these effects settings cannot be stored in the patterns. Anything else that you want to store, I forgot to mention this, by the way, like for example this change to our TR-808 sound that we dialed in here. Let's call that up again quickly. Bank 28, number 4. Okay, so like when we change this to make it a bass sound, more of a bass sound. This is very low. So when we want to keep it like this, what we need to do is make a setup right. Same thing, by the way, as if we want to change the tempo. Tempo is set to 161. Let's say we want to change this to 160 and also keep this tone like this. We need to make a setup right, which is one of these edit commands that I was talking about, holding down these two buttons, then pressing pad key number 15, setup right. The machine asked me, do you really want to do this? Yes, I press enter, and now, even when I change to another pattern, user pattern 3, and back. Now the tempo should be 160, not 161, and our tone should be this TR-808 waveform that we have altered. And we've seen, yes, this is how it works. Now the effects. When again in this black box we can see that the effects level is set when we have the function button activated for either the delay or reverb unit. When this button is unlit, then that's the output level for the delay and reverb unit, or when this button is lit, this controls the output level of the flanger and chorus unit. Okay, so, but in the menu for the effects unit, we can here decide what part of our pattern we are affecting. We don't need to affect all the parts in the same way. We can say that maybe part 1 should get a very strong reverb signal. Also, of course, depending on how this output is set. And also how this other parameter is set when this when function is not activated. Then we can control, for example, the size of the room for the reverb. And we can even dial in a higher value here. Okay, so that's how that works. We have send levels. These are send levels for all the individual parts. 2, 3, 4. Default, I think, is always 20. So when you have nothing written in one of these parts, then there should be a value of 20. And of course, we can, for the tones that we don't want any reverb on or any of these effects, we can dial it all the way back to 0. Then we don't hear the reverb for these parts when there is not nothing, no amount of the signal on the current part that's going into the effect. Now, there are other pages. When I go back to the menu page type, which lets me select the type of effect. There are 3 room reverbs, 2 halls, and then 1 plate reverb. And then there's the delays, 1 regular delay and a pan delay. These are the effects type. There's a whole second page that does exactly the same. I don't understand why that's even there. A whole second page that does exactly the same. The funny thing is, changing the reverb type or effects type, could also be a delay, on the first page changes the value that's shown on the second page as well. So changing the plate reverb, that's the same as entry number 5 on the second page. When I change this to anything else, let's say room 2, now I can see there's a different value shown on this second page now. But when I change this page, it does not work the other way around. This does not change what's shown on page 1. When I go back, this is still room 2. But this entry here, the assignment that I make here, that's what actually defines the type of effect that I'm hearing. So you can see I leave this on room 2, change the page. Now I dial in the value 7. 7, that's this delay effect, pan delay. So now let's see what kind of effect do I get here. Okay, I need to change the value going into the effect. This is clearly a pan delay. It's not room 2. This is not room 2. This is the pan delay effect that I have dialed in on page number 2. So weird. And it gets even weirder The effects unit number 2 works in very much the same way. I get the option to send part of the effect signal from one unit also to the next, and I can create this kind of feedback loop. Now you have to be really careful with this. The last page in the effects units, either the delayer reverb or flanger chorus, gives me a send level to this other unit, and I can make a feedback loop by sending the signal to the chorus unit. RSC is for reverb send to chorus. When I turn this all the way up, and also now in the flanger and chorus unit, I send part of the signal back to the reverb. Now I have created a feedback. So, and becomes even worse when I have a large value dialed in for feedback time here. Okay, I have to be really careful now when the signal gets in. So, this is already, I have already created a feedback that takes away all the sound. I don't hear anything. I should be able to hear the sound in part 4, but I am not, because I have created this feedback loop that completely causes the whole system to crush. These two effects cancel each other out. I only hear something when I dial this back. Now I can listen to the machine again. And you need to know this. If you have if you make a setup right with a setting like this, then you get the idea that your unit is broken. It is just this one setting that's messed up, but you think your unit is broken, doesn't produce sound anymore, and you sell it used on eBay for $5. You don't want that to happen. You need to be aware of the setting that you have dialed in your machine. Okay, I noticed that some of these explanations weren't so great. Maybe I hope it was still helpful to you. If you have any more specific questions, don't hesitate. Just write them in the comments. I'll get back to you, try to answer as good as I can. I'll see you in the next one when I want to talk about the arpeggiator and the sequencer and other things. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.